Aayan loved dusty corners. He adored forgotten things. Old shops called to him like a secret song, a melody only he could truly appreciate. Every Saturday, without fail, he embarked on his hunt for treasures, not gold, not jewels. He searched for the odd, the peculiar, the items that seemed to carry an unspoken history. He believed these items held stories, whispers of the past just waiting to be heard by someone curious enough to listen. His apartment was a museum of the strange, a testament to his unwavering dedication to the discarded and the unique. His friends sometimes teased him. "Another piece of junk, Aayan?" they'd ask, their eyes scanning his latest find with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment. But Aayan didn't mind their light-hearted jabs. He knew they didn't understand the thrill of uncovering something with a secret, something that felt out of place in the modern world. He cherished the connection he felt to these objects, a silent dialogue between him and their unknown pasts. Each item was a puzzle, a fragment of a life he could only imagine, making his own life feel richer and more mysterious. Sana, his girlfriend, was more understanding. She found his hobby endearing, even if she didn't always share his enthusiasm for cobweb-laden relics. "Just be careful what you bring home," she'd often say, a playful warning in her voice that held a hint of genuine concern. She appreciated the artistry in some of his finds, the craftsmanship of bygone eras, but sometimes, she admitted, the sheer strangeness of an object could send a little shiver down her spine. Aayan always promised to be discerning, though his definition of discerning often leaned heavily towards irresistibly weird. This particular Saturday felt different. An itch of anticipation hummed beneath Aayan's skin. He had a feeling, a strong premonition, that today he would find something truly extraordinary. The city air was crisp, the sky a pale, washed-out blue, perfect weather for exploring the hidden nooks and crannies where forgotten items lay in wait. He grabbed his worn messenger bag, his heart thumping with the familiar excitement of the hunt. Little did he know the treasure he was about to unearth would be far more than just peculiar. It would be a harbinger of unimaginable dread. He found himself drawn to a part of town he rarely visited. Down a narrow cobblestone alleyway, almost hidden from the bustling main street, was a shop. It had no name, just a grimy window displaying a haphazard collection of dusty objects. The sign above, if there ever was one, had long since vanished, leaving only faint outlines on the weathered wood. A faint, musty odor emanated from within, a smell of old paper, decaying fabric, and something else. Something indefinable and faintly unsettling. It was exactly the kind of place Aayan lived for, a treasure trove of the overlooked. The bell above the door didn't jingle. It let out a dull, mournful thud as Aayan pushed it open. Inside, shadows clung to every corner, and the air was thick and still. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grimy window panes, casting long, distorted shapes across the cluttered floor. Shelves overflowed with an eclectic mix of items, chipped porcelain dolls with vacant stares, tarnished silver, stacks of yellowed books with cracked spines, and peculiar gadgets whose purposes were long forgotten. It was a mausoleum of memories, each object a silent sentinel of a past life. An old man emerged from the Stygian gloom at the back of the shop. He moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, his eyes like faded photographs. He didn't speak, merely nodded, his gaze seeming to pass right through Aayan. The silence in the shop was heavy, broken only by the creak of floorboards under Aayan's feet and the distant muffled sounds of the city outside. Aayan felt a prickle of unease, but his curiosity was a far stronger force, urging him to explore the labyrinthine aisles of this forgotten emporium. He felt like an archaeologist unearthing a lost civilization. He navigated through teetering piles of whatnots and curiosities. Each item seemed to whisper a silent invitation, a plea to be noticed, to be chosen. There were music boxes that played no tunes, mirrors that reflected distorted images, and portraits of people whose smiles seemed to follow him as he moved. The atmosphere was undeniably creepy, the kind of place where you expected a ghostly hand to brush your shoulder at any moment. But for Aayan, this was paradise. He was in his element, sifting through the debris of time, searching for that one special piece. And then he saw it, tucked away on a dusty shelf, partially obscured by a moth-eaten velvet curtain, was a clock. But it wasn't an ordinary clock. It was made of a dark, unfamiliar wood, almost black, with strange, intricate carvings that seemed to writhe and twist if you looked at them for too long. The face of the clock was not glass, but a strange, opaque material, cool to the touch. There were no traditional hands, no Roman numerals, no familiar ticking sound that usually accompanied such an instrument of time measurement. It was unlike anything Aayan had ever encountered. Instead of telling the time, the clock displayed a series of glowing crimson numbers. They weren't hours and minutes of the day, they were counting down. Days, hours, minutes, seconds, a relentless, silent descent towards an unknown zero. Aayan frowned, his curiosity piqued. What was it counting down to? A forgotten anniversary? Some obscure, long-past event? The numbers seemed to pulse with a faint inner light, casting an eerie red glow on the surrounding dust motes. It was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. He reached out and touched its cold, smooth surface. A faint vibration hummed beneath his fingertips, almost imperceptible, like a trapped insect buzzing frantically. The air around the clock felt noticeably colder, a pocket of chill in the otherwise stuffy shop. He tried to find a maker's mark, a name, anything that might offer a clue to its origin or purpose, but the dark wood was unblemished by any identifying symbols. It was an enigma, a beautifully crafted puzzle box that offered no immediate answers, only more questions. The shopkeeper, who had remained silent and almost invisible in the shadows, seemed to materialize beside him. His sudden presence made Aayan jump slightly. The old man's eyes, however, were not on Aayan, but fixed intently on the clock, a strange, unreadable expression flickering across his aged features. He still said nothing, merely watched as Aayan examined the mysterious device. It was as if the clock itself held some strange power over him, or perhaps he was waiting for Aayan to make a decision that might carry unseen consequences. "This clock," Aayan began, his voice a little hesitant, "it's unusual. Does it work?" He gestured towards the glowing countdown, a silent question hanging in the air. The numbers continued their relentless descent. 7 days, 14 hours, 32 minutes, 5 seconds. The shopkeeper finally broke his silence, his voice a dry, rasping whisper, like leaves skittering across pavement. "It keeps its own time," he said, his words cryptic and offering no real explanation. His gaze remained fixed on the crimson digits, a hint of something akin to weariness in his eyes. Aayan was hooked. The mystery of it was too compelling to ignore. A clock that counted down to an unknown event? It was the ultimate peculiar find. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it a prop from an old movie, a piece of an elaborate game, or something far stranger? The lack of information only fueled his desire to possess it, to unravel its secrets. He imagined it sitting in his apartment, a conversational piece, a source of endless speculation for him and Sana. He had to have it. Despite the subtle chill it seemed to emanate. "How much for it?" Aayan asked, trying to keep the eagerness out of his voice, a trick he'd learned from years of haggling in such establishments. The old man named a price. It was surprisingly low, almost too low for such an intricate and unusual piece. This should have been a warning sign, perhaps, a red flag. But Aayan, blinded by the allure of the unknown, saw it only as a bargain, another reason to take this strange artifact home with him. He quickly agreed, handing over the cash before the shopkeeper could change his mind. As the old man wrapped the clock in a piece of old newspaper, his hands fumbled slightly. He didn't meet Aayan's eyes. "Be careful with it," he mumbled, almost as an afterthought. "Some things prefer not to be disturbed." The words hung in the musty air, a faint, almost imperceptible warning. Aayan, however, was too excited by his new acquisition to pay much heed. He clutched the wrapped clock tightly, a thrill coursing through him. He had found his extraordinary item, completely unaware of the true nature of the countdown it held. Back in his apartment, Aayan carefully unwrapped his prize. The dark wood seemed even blacker in the brighter light of his living room, the crimson numbers glowing with an almost malevolent intensity. Sana watched him, a curious smile playing on her lips. "What have you dragged home this time, Mr. Curiosity?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. When she saw the countdown, her smile faltered slightly. "That's different. What's it counting down to? New Year's? Your birthday isn't for months." Her voice was light, but her eyes held a flicker of unease. Aayan shrugged, a wide grin on his face. "That's the mystery," he exclaimed, clearly delighted by the puzzle. The old guy in the shop didn't know or wouldn't say. "Isn't it fantastic?" He found the perfect spot for it on the mantelpiece, nestled between an antique spyglass and a collection of mismatched porcelain hands. It immediately dominated the space, its strange presence altering the familiar feel of the room. The glowing red numbers pulsed steadily, a silent rhythmic beat in their home. He couldn't stop looking at it, a sense of triumph welling within him. Sana, however, didn't share his unadulterated enthusiasm. She found the clock unsettling. "It feels cold," she said, rubbing her arms, even though the apartment was warm. "And those numbers, they're a bit creepy, don't you think? Like it's counting down to something bad." Aayan chuckled, dismissing her concerns. "You're just not used to its artistic charm," he teased, though a tiny part of him acknowledged the chill she mentioned. He had felt it too in the shop, but had pushed it aside in his excitement. As evening fell, the red glow of the countdown numbers seemed to intensify, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The apartment, usually a cozy sanctuary, felt subtly different. The familiar comfort was tinged with an undercurrent of something alien. Aayan kept glancing at the clock, the numbers burning into his vision. 7 days, 8 hours, 15 minutes, 42 seconds. He felt a strange pull towards it, a fascination mixed with a nascent, unacknowledged apprehension. He told himself it was just an unusual antique, nothing more, but the clock watched them, its silent countdown a constant, unnerving reminder of an approaching unknown deadline. Section 6. Unseen Presences. The first night, the strangeness began subtly. A heavy, oppressive quality settled into the air of the apartment. It was more than just stuffiness. It felt thick, like wading through invisible water. Sana complained of a persistent chill, even when she huddled under blankets. Aayan too noticed the drop in temperature, particularly around the mantelpiece where the clock sat, its crimson digits unwavering. He checked the thermostat, the windows, everything was normal. Yet the cold clung to them, a damp, unwelcome presence in their home. Then came the noises. Faint at first, a soft ticking, but not from any of their other clocks. This ticking was erratic, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, seeming to echo the frantic beat of a nervous heart. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, or perhaps from the shadows that deepened in the corners of the room. Aayan tried to locate its source, pressing his ear against the plaster, but the sound would shift, elusive and taunting. Sana heard it too, her eyes wide with a growing sense of unease. Soon a low humming joined the chorus of unsettling sounds. It was a deep, resonant thrum, almost below the threshold of hearing, yet it vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the loose change on Aayan's dresser. It made their teeth ache, their heads feel fuzzy. And then the whispers, soft, sibilant whispers just on the edge of perception. Were they imagining it? The wind, the old building settling? Or was it something else, something tied to the new silent occupant on their mantelpiece, the clock with its relentless, burning countdown? Sana grew increasingly fearful. "Aayan, I don't like this," she said one evening, her voice trembling slightly. "Ever since that clock came here, things have been wrong. The cold, the noises, it's not normal." Aayan tried to reassure her and himself. "It's an old building, Sana. Old things make noises, and the clock is just a clock." But even as he spoke the words, a sliver of doubt pricked at his own conviction. The glowing numbers on the clock seemed to mock his attempts at rationalization. 5 days, 19 hours, 2 minutes, 11 seconds. Section 7. Time's Treacherous Twist. The most disturbing phenomenon started to affect Aayan directly. Time itself began to warp around him. He would be reading a book, engrossed in a chapter, and then suddenly look up, hours having vanished in what felt like mere minutes. The lost time left him disoriented with a gnawing sense of unease. He'd find himself standing in a room with no memory of how he got there, the intervening moments erased completely from his mind. These episodes were becoming more frequent, more pronounced. The whispers grew louder, clearer, though the words remained indistinct, a chorus of hushed voices murmuring just out of reach. Sometimes he thought he could almost make out a word, a phrase, but it would dissolve before he could grasp its meaning. These eerie voices seemed to emanate from the clock itself, or perhaps from the very air around it. He started to feel as if he were constantly being watched, an unseen audience observing his every move, their silent judgment heavy in the unnerving atmosphere of his own home. Sana noticed the changes in him. His usual cheerfulness was replaced by a haunted, distracted look. He was jumpy, irritable, and increasingly obsessed with the countdown clock. He would stare at it for long periods, his face pale, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Aayan, are you all right?" she'd ask, her voice filled with concern. He would just shake his head, unable to articulate the growing dread that coiled in his stomach, the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong, not just with the apartment, but with his own perception of reality. He tried to remove the clock once. As his fingers brushed against the cold, dark wood, an intense wave of nausea washed over him, and the whispers in the room rose to a cacophony of urgent, angry murmurs. His hand recoiled as if burned. The clock remained on the mantelpiece, its crimson numbers continuing their inexorable march, 3 days, 4 hours, 58 minutes, 30 seconds. The connection between the clock and the terrifying events was now undeniable. It wasn't just an antique, it was a source, a beacon, drawing something unwelcome into their lives. Section 8. The Eve of Oblivion. As the countdown dwindled, the atmosphere in the apartment became almost unbearable. The last 24 hours were a blur of escalating terror. The lights in the apartment began to flicker and dim erratically, plunging them into disorienting twilight at random intervals, regardless of whether the switches were on or off. Strange, fleeting shapes darted at the periphery of their vision, too quick to identify, like shadows detaching themselves from the walls and taking on a momentary, horrifying substance. The cold was no longer just a chill. It was a biting, bone-deep iciness that no amount of heating could dispel. The humming intensified into a palpable, low-frequency throb that vibrated through their very bones, making their chests ache and their heads spin. And then the pounding started, a heavy, rhythmic pounding like a giant fist hammering on a distant door or perhaps on the very foundations of the building. It would come in bursts, shaking the floorboards and rattling the windows in their frames. Aayan and Sana huddled together, their faces pale with terror, listening to the relentless, unseen assault on their sanctuary. Sleep became impossible. Aayan felt a crushing weight of despair. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that the end of the countdown meant something terrible for him. The clock was not just marking time, it was marking his time. The voices were clearer now, though still not understandable, swirling around him like a vortex, urgent and insistent. He felt a strange pull, an invisible force tugging him towards the clock, towards the approaching zero. He was a prisoner in his own home, a captive of the malevolent artifact he had so eagerly brought inside. Sana pleaded with him to leave, to go to her parents' house, anywhere but there. "We have to get out, Aayan, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. But Aayan felt rooted to the spot, a terrifying paralysis gripping him. He couldn't leave. It was as if the clock had woven an invisible net around him, tightening its hold with every passing second. The numbers burned bright 0 days, 1 hour, 9 minutes, 54 seconds. The final hour had begun, and the apartment felt like a tomb waiting for its occupant. Section 9, 0 hour, new beginning. The pounding grew deafening. The lights blinked out completely, plunging the apartment into absolute darkness, save for the hellish crimson glow of the clock's numbers. 0 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1. As the final second ticked away, the numbers flashed brightly. 0, 0, 0, 0. Then an unnatural silence descended. The pounding stopped, the humming ceased. The cold air seemed to recede slightly. Sana, who had been clinging to Aayan, opened her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. Aayan was gone, vanished. One moment he was there, his hand gripping hers tightly, his body trembling beside her. The next there was only empty space. No sound of struggle, no cry, no trace. He had simply ceased to exist within the confines of their apartment. Sana screamed his name, her voice raw with terror and disbelief. She fumbled for her phone, its weak light cutting a pathetic swathe through the oppressive darkness. The apartment was eerily still, the silence more terrifying than the preceding chaos. She searched frantically, her calls for Aayan echoing unanswered through the empty rooms. Everything was untouched. The furniture was in place, their belongings undisturbed. It was as if he had dissolved into thin air. The only thing different was the clock. Its crimson numbers were dark. The countdown had ended. Sobbing, heartbroken, and utterly terrified, Sana fled the apartment, running out into the pre-dawn light, not stopping until she reached the safety of a friend's house. The horrifying events replaying endlessly in her mind. Days later, after the police had conducted their fruitless investigation, after the questions and the sympathetic but uncomprehending looks, Sana cautiously returned to the apartment to gather her things. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she unlocked the door. Everything was as she had left it, coated in a thin layer of dust. And there on the mantelpiece sat the clock. Its dark wood gleamed innocently. But as she drew closer, a fresh wave of horror washed over her. The opaque face was no longer dark. It glowed once more with crimson numbers. It had reset, and it was counting down again. 10 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, 58 seconds. In her home, the cycle was beginning anew.